Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, the coach is back. He is your life coach, Dan Clark, and he's here to transform your life. And we really do mean that in many different ways. And we're going to start digging into that in just a sec. Dan, it's great to have you back. How you doing?
It's great to be back. I love this warm weather in the Midwest. It's going to be 70 degrees today. I will take it all day long. Short sleeves. I'm ready to go.
Oh, I am so jealous. I'm going to turn my head, not being disrespectful. I'm going to turn my head and tell you that in the New York area, it's 31.
Oh,
and the last time we talked last week, you had snow.
Oh, I did. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Wow. I remember it was the hard, crunchy snow that you could literally.
Yeah, it was. You walked on top of it. It was so hard. It was weird.
Wow. I didn't know that Missouri had such varied weather like that.
Well, we're in the Midwest. And so when the winds blow from the north, we're cold. And when it blows from the south, we're warm. So we have no idea what we're going to get.
Wow. I do know here it's going to be near record breaking on Sunday, 58 degrees, but cloudy, but that could be kind of the same thing. You know, cold, it's warm, but either way, you're a life coach. We've talked in depth about different principles and a whole bunch of different topics. And let me just back up here and say what makes you different than any other life coach. And this is coming from me. This is not just, I'm reading this here. It's because you center on emotion. Nobody else does that. And emotion is really what drives everything and everyone. So how about we take a look at the process when you're helping somebody out, and you've helped out thousands of people. When you help them out, why don't we take them through the process of your coaching?
Thank you, Steve. I would love to do that. I've had such success stories from all walks of life, because when we understand how important emotions are, that's why I call it transform life. It's living life to the fullest. When you experience life fully, there is nothing like that at all. Most of us don't know what emotions are really about. We think that emotions are either being weak or crying or being emotional, when really emotions are nothing more than experiencing what's happening on the inside of you. I want to use a definition I used before because I want to kind of validate what I'm talking about. Vulnerability is when you walk out of the shower, can't deny what's true, right? Well, vulnerability emotionally is that same thing. When you are willing to be vulnerable emotionally, that means that you are at your core person, and learning how to be that way is so powerful, because if you are willing to be vulnerable emotionally, that means that you are experiencing the moment fully. Now, there's a couple other things that are important about vulnerability. And one of those is that we often feel like that we have to talk about what we're experiencing. And that's one of the things that I teach quite often. Is called the talk less rule. Sometimes I have fun with it, called the shut up rule. But learning to not talk and to feel the emotion is one of the very first steps that we go through. So vulnerability, my willingness to feel the emotion. I just don't have to tell you.
Now, how do you apply that when it's somebody else? Let's say you're in a relationship, could be business, could be personal. How do you apply that to somebody else and you want them to know what you're feeling?
Well, first question would be, why do you want them to know what you're feeling? Because they're your emotions, right? They're just your emotions. Emotions are nothing more than the inside of you. And the experiences that you've had on the inside have taught you what those emotions are about. So emotions don't lie to us, but often we want the other person to understand us or to figure us out or to have some knowledge about us. So express our emotions, mostly about what we don't like about what's happening. And what I've been talking about to start with is we start out with understanding that the emotions are nothing more than a reaction to what's happening inside you. A better way to put it is this, is that if I'm having emotions and I want to share them with that person, what I'm saying about those emotions are related to what I either want or don't want based on what I'm experiencing. What I'm saying is that if you practice just being with the emotion and not talking right away, you actually are going to have more wisdom about what to do, because then you're not just reacting to the emotion, you're allowing it to flow through you, and you can make wiser choices by being comfortable with it. That's kind of what we talk about when we talk about anxiety. Let me show you a slide real quick. I don't think I did this before. If you can see this, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Let's talk about emotions for a second. And this is why we start here, why emotions are so important. Emotions create thoughts, create behaviors. Now, I can have a random thought, right? We don't have random thoughts after 30. But when I have an emotion, when I have a thought, rather, it always comes from an emotion. And an emotion and a thought are tied together from past experiences. My thoughts have a behavior tied to them. Every time I have a thought, there's always a behavior that's tied to it. If I notice my thoughts, I can absolutely stop the behavior. If I don't notice the thoughts, I can't stop the behavior. If I go from emotion to behavior, it's an addiction or an automatic behavior, like driving your car, it's automatic. One of the reasons that emotions are important is we're trying to teach individuals how to understand the fact that we have to be aware of what we're thinking about to change the behavior. Also, to be aware of what we're thinking about so we can catch the emotion. Now, in that figure I just showed you, Steve, if we change the emotions in that particular setting, we change everything about us. If you're having pleasant emotions, what kind of thoughts are you going to have? What kind of behavior are you going to have? If you're having unpleasant emotions, what kind of thoughts and behaviors are you going to have? And that's why it's so important to recognize that the emotions inside you that are created by the event affect everything about you. And that takes a little bit of work on our current culture.
So really what we're saying is the emotions are the foundation of everything, and that's going to drive everything else.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. Going to drive everything else. Right.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's a powerful thing because there's 5 emotions, fear, anger, sadness, and joy. I talked about them before. But what I want to go back into talking about the emotional piece is that there's something that's very fascinating to me about the emotion part, and that is something called yearnings. Now, we haven't talked about this before, but I want to step into this in a very powerful way. Now, Steve, help me here. If you'll write these down and keep track of these for me, all right? There are 5 basic yearnings. The first one is to be seen. The second one is to be heard. The third one is to feel important. The fourth one is to be known and understood. And the last one is to be loved and cared for. Now, if we think about that in a slide, as we're children, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to feel important, we want to be known and understood, right? But if those first 4 yearnings don't get met, we really don't feel loved and cared for. When someone doesn't make you feel important, what happens to you, right? So that's why emotions and yearnings are tied so closely together, because emotions are created by the lack of feeling connected with another person. Something's not happening. And that happens so far. That's why emotions are so powerful, because we connect with everyone in our world all the time.
Wow. I'm processing that, and it makes perfect sense. If you're not connecting with somebody, you're going to experience those emotions. It's just,
and if you don't connect early enough in life as a child, even as a young person with a parent or with people in your world, then you don't have the skill about how to connect. So we live just in the emotional piece of it. Like, I don't have emotions, right? I just want to behave, as opposed to feeling. But if someone sees you, if they hear you, if you feel important, what kind of emotions are you going to have?
Well, positive ones, I would think.
Yeah. And if you don't feel important, the opposite. So the second thing that we talk about, and when I'm taking someone through this process, is help them recognize how important yearnings are, especially in a relationship and even to ourselves. Like, how do I really feel about myself? Do I feel like I'm important to me, or I'm important in the world? Kind of like purpose and giftings, and those a little bit later on in the process. But this yearning part is so important because we all yearn for those things. I mean, think about it. What you do for a living, what I do for a living, we feel important, right? But sometimes we mess up and we don't, really can't, what did I do? Why did I do that kind of thing? That's not really what we're talking about here, because yearnings aren't about really what I feel about myself. Yearnings about how I feel about with someone else and how I connect and interact with them. And so everything that we do in the world is related to that. And that means that if we don't have quality connections, or it's called positivity resonance while we're growing up, then it's really hard to understand how yearnings work, because we want to avoid not feeling important.
So let's look at that as you're growing up. So let's say you didn't get positive reinforcement from your parents. Let's say your parents split up, whatever it might be. How is that going to leave you potentially today?
Well, I have a couple of success stories I want to bring up. One was a young man who owned a large factory here locally, and his wife moved out on Christmas Day. It was like very devastating to him. He was probably in his late 40s at that point. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And he was devastated by that, did not recognize how difficult he was to live with, because he felt like running his business was so important. That's all he needed to do for his family. And his wife and his 2 children were finally tired, and they were young adults. Well, actually, I guess they're high schoolers. They were done. His wife in particular was done with his behavior. He's like, what do I need to do? Well, when he showed up in my world, what we began to focus on was that as he grew up with an alcoholic dad and a distant mom, and he had an aunt that spent a lot of time with him, and he loved his grandma and grandpa, but none of them really connected well. They really never had relationships where they were close. But they'd have dinners together and, Thanksgiving and Christmas and holidays and things like that, but they never really talked about those deep things that were going on. And so he didn't have that skill. And so we started there by helping him recognize how he perceived the world. Everything was kind of cold and calculated and just what you kind of did, But as he began to recognize how he really felt about the world, now this man had some wonderful emotions on the inside of him because he loved his children so much. Never missed any of their basketball games or their soccer games, went to all the sports events. And yet, even though he was doing that, he never really felt close to them. So when I taught him how to understand his yearnings and how to manage his emotions, his life completely turned around. I think, as a matter of fact, that was the year that I got a thank you letter from his wife on Father's Day, thanking me so much for giving her husband back to her.
So, okay, so she moved out, but they didn't break up. You fixed.
She moved out, right. And the relationship to survive, I think they were with me for about 4 years, actually. So it's a long-term process when there's a lot of damage in a relationship. But I want to talk about his business, though. It's flourishing now because he had difficulty with hiring employees, which is also part of what we worked with, because he was just hard to get along with. And when you release all that stuff, when you realize, well, let me make a statement here. And again, track with me on this one, because this is one of those very powerful statements that I love that I have figured out that works. What your brain doesn't get as a child, it demands as an adult. So all brains are different, but if a child demands to be important, if an adult demands to be important, they didn't feel important as a child. It's kind of weird, right? So if you have difficulties in your adult life, it's because something didn't get wired well in your childhood.
And what you just said, if you want to feel important in your everyday adult life, you're yearning for that all the time. You're looking for that positive reinforcement. You're asking, look what I did for you. Look at this. Look at this. And if you're not getting it back, it's going to be counterproductive in your relationships.
And we can't actually predict how we're going to be based on what we experience, because every brain is different. Like some young adults or some adults who don't want to be seen, even though they really weren't seen as a child, is because it's a wound part. So it's all different. It's all over the place. But you can always pretty much guarantee the fact that the things that you need the most, especially in a relationship as an adult, is something you did not get while you're growing up. And that's the powerful way of understanding how transformation is moving away from understanding what you need as opposed to what you want. And wanting is so different than need.
Can we break that down for just 5 seconds here? So just the need and the want.
Well, I don't need anything. I want things, right? I might need air. I might need water, housing, stuff like that, food. But I don't really need things like, I don't really need someone. I don't need someone to be there for me. I really don't. I want. Want is soft. It's lightweight. And we can move away from a want if things aren't working well. But if it's a need, it's a powerful energy drainer, and it's something that can be overpowering for me.
What about if you think you need something, but it's really not something you want? Like, for example, you just said, I need somebody to be there. I need that. I need that. It's really a want, but what about if it's crossed over in your brain into the need side? How do you deal with that?
Well, again, speaking about the emotions and the yearnings, we break that down to show them the fact that they don't trust. They have broken relationships in the past, and they're doing the same pattern that they did when they were growing up or whatever they learned those things. And when that broken pattern is there, we can't live without this person or whatever that stuff is,
Right.
And that codependency, we talk about that, even though I don't use that language, but it's about an understanding that since I don't need them, I only want them. I learn how to trust myself and trust the unknown, learning how to pay attention to my deeper self and my deeper voice.
Right. And that's part of what you do. Now, I'm glad you gave that success story, because that was going to be one of my questions. When you work with somebody, you get into the very specific, deep, personal information, and that you get deep. That's it.
I've got a great story about a young lady. She was with me for about 4 years. Her story's on my website. And her story is about she's getting married now, and she's divorced, had a very difficult relationship, and came to see me after some terrible things were happening with her children and her family. And she was upfront. I am not talking about my past, and I'm not talking about my mom. And it was so much fun to work with her because I promised her we wouldn't have to talk about that.
But I'll bet you.
However, it came up, right?
Right. You know what? Because I'm sure that she wanted to talk about it, but maybe she wasn't ready and didn't feel comfortable.
Well, let me tell you what the process is. Here's what I taught her, which is why she changed. I mean, she had a lot of stuff to work on, but why she changed so much. When you feel hurt, oh, that hurts a lot right now. It's actually emptying everything in your hurt bucket where you've been hurt in the past. That's why you don't have to go back there and talk about it. When you feel an emotion, vulnerability, it actually empties the bucket more. And the more that you feel hurt in the current moment, because in the current moment, if there's a bunch of hurt in that bucket, it's powerful. Well, the more you empty that bucket by just being present and feeling the hurt, it empties it. And pretty soon there's nothing more in there but just the current hurt. That's how you transition. That's how you become the most powerful, wonderful, present person alive, because you no longer have old stuff in your bucket just by allowing it to empty every time you get hurt, as an example.
How do we do that?
Well, you feel it. You choose to feel it. If you can name the emotion, your body will produce it. I hurt. That hurts me. I don't like this. This is not something I like. That hurts me a lot. As soon as we're naming the emotion, it begins to show up.
Okay, so you say we name the emotion, so I think that's relatively easy for us to do. You said to empty the bucket from the past. The past hurts, and not maybe the current one triggered the past, but you need to identify what the past hurt was before you can empty the bucket. No? Okay, tell me. I'm listening.
No, it may show up in your brain, right? But you don't have to identify it. Your brain may say, this happened when you were 7 or 12. And I'm like, okay, you don't have to even talk about it. Just acknowledge the fact that it happened back there, but feel it just like it was happening right now. And you just move through it. Your brain knows what it wants to let go of. So it will always remind you the things that it hasn't relieved yet. I mean, your brain knows exactly what it needs, why it's struggling. And it will tell you along the way what it wants you to let go of. And so it's the simple process of this hurts, but I'm letting go of it. This hurts, but I'm letting go of it. Now we have two voices. And we're going to transition because in these two voices, we have our head voice and our heart voice. Mm-hmm. Now, when we are experiencing our emotions, sometimes we get our head voice in the way. Well, you're hurting me and I can't believe you're doing this. And you're really unhappy about this person's behavior toward you. When really the heart voice is, I just don't like this. This isn't working for me. We often want someone outside ourselves to solve our own pain. What we have to learn how is to solve our own pain on the inside. Have to pay attention to the two voices. The deeper voice, which is your deepest voice on the inside of you, we use some meditation techniques and some hypnosis techniques to get you to that place where you can grasp that concept a lot easier. And once you remember, we do have the shut up rule, right? Once you stop talking and you have an emotion and you feel it, you can recognize what it is that's wired with that, and it's a lot easier to let go of it. It feels complicated in the moment, but once you spend some time with me, it's really super easy.
It's so key to let go of that. And so many of us don't know how to do it. I think that's really what it comes down to.
Well, let's go to the next stage of working with someone. Then we begin to work on playfulness. Now, Steve, I think you're kind of playful yourself. I am. I was with a client the other day and I was laughing and they were like, that's just exactly like my 4-year-old grandson, because I can be so lightweight because I've worked really hard at letting go of all the stuff that's around me. The research on playfulness and transformation for adults is powerful. As a matter of fact, if you're not playful, you really are not going to transition. That's because children can live above the emotion. It doesn't mean they don't feel it, but they don't integrate it into the fact that I hate you. It's more like, I just don't like this right now, right? This isn't working for me. Playfulness is very, very powerful. Now, there are times when playfulness doesn't work, obviously, like when we're grieving and there's big emotions that show up. But for the most part, relationships that survive have a playfulness about them that is just fabulous. And that's because they're living in their childlike, innocent brain.
Mm-hmm. I'm right there with you. And I do it with my daughter all the time. We'll send pictures back on Snapchat. And sometimes it's a picture of a ceiling with you see a piece of somebody's head, or just like silly stuff back and forth. But that's kind of our thing. We just have fun with it.
That's exactly what that's like.
Yeah.
But here's the challenge, Mr. Steve. Check this out. When do you play without your daughter?
With other people, you mean?
Yeah. When do you play without your daughter?
I'll if I could, I'd show you all the texts. Like I'll be bouncing back and forth, like goofy things, and even somebody I'm very close to will be talking back and forth. Yeah.
So let me challenge you, however. If you play like you did as a child, it will feel weird and awkward. Now, the goal here is that if anything makes you feel awkward or weird or uncomfortable, it means you haven't integrated it. So play is actually feeling awkward. So in order to really change how your brain functions at this level, you must do activities that make you feel uncomfortable, like going to a playground or coloring or wearing a different color shirt that you'd never wear before, like wear your hat backwards. Like I had a young lady, she's like 70 years old and wore a black and a brown shoe to work. She works in a church because she was just being playful, right? People notice it's being silly. And when you start being silly like that, you don't continue it for long term. But what you're doing is you're practicing allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable, vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the more you become uncomfortable and vulnerable by behavior, because this is a behavior way of change, it actually changes the way your brain functions. Like I have a couple men that I'm working with right now that I'm teaching them how to pretend to be angry because that's play. And so when you pretend to be angry, your body learns how to manage the sensation easier than if it's just showing up because something's happening. So play is a very valuable part of this transition.
So basically, you need to get out of your zone, maybe your comfort zone, your comfort play zone, but you need to be in a happy place. That's what how are you going to do that unless you're feeling good?
Look at that, the movie Elf, right? Here we go. You get in an elevator. The next time you get in an elevator, I challenge you to touch all the buttons and just watch all of the people in the elevator with you, right?
I would never do that because, okay, and I love the analogy and the example, but I would never do that because out of respect for them. But you know what? Everybody would probably turn around and start laughing at each other.
So do you see how play is hard for you? You just admitted the fact that they are so important. Children don't care about it. They just want to play.
Well, where do you draw the line, though? I'll be the first.
You're not hurting anybody. It's play because you're having fun, right? Now, they may be irritated about it, but that has nothing to do with you. See, you're so concerned about them.
I'll give you an example. I was years ago, did a live broadcast. I'll make this really quick. And there was a rumor that a shark came into the lagoon at the resort. And at the time, the engineer, very dear friend, since passed, but loved him. He's a great guy. I took my snorkel mask and I threw it up on the beach, hit a rock, it smashed. So that was my favorite one. I'm not going to throw it away, even though it's useless. I get in the elevator and we concocted this story that the shark came face to face with me, hit me in the mask. And then later at dinner, people like, there's a guy over there with the shark. Oh my God. So, I mean, I had fun because it wasn't at somebody else's expense, so to speak. But the elevator buttons, I feel like I'd be messing everybody up. But really, they probably all laugh at it anyway.
Well, again, here's the difficult part, Steve, is that the reason that you have to be out of character for a little bit, the more uncomfortable that you feel, I promise, the healthier you'll get. Now, I'm going to honor the fact that you wouldn't want to do that where you are. But again, doing things that are extremely uncomfortable, not fun, but uncomfortable, where you feel embarrassed or like you don't want to do them is the only way we really transition. And that's why this work is so powerful, because it truly teaches your body to feel the emotion that's happening because you're creating it by what you're doing.
So what if you're not at that stage in your life where things are good? Let's say you've got a lot of challenges going on. I'm not saying it's good. You should be, embracing every day and look for the positive points in it. And how are you going to do that? And, press all the buttons in the elevator. How are you going to do that?
Well, most of the clients that I work with are with me for a year, because it takes a year for the brain to turn around and 2 years for it to be permanent. So it takes a while, and it takes a while for everyone to get there, right? So it's a slow process. It's not like it's super intense sometimes because it takes time for our brain to begin to acclimate toward the new behavior. But you slowly, and that's the skill that I have, is help them to get to the place where we figure out what they need to do. Now, not everyone's going to do all the work, but it depends on the level to which you want to be, right? Some people are just never going to be super playful. I'm okay with it. It doesn't matter about that. But as long as they lean into it a little bit, they're going to see the transformation. So it's very individualistic, and you must take the things in order or it doesn't work. You can't jump the different stages because they build on one another.
So when we say the different stages, and I don't even know if we have time to do that, but can you give us the different stages?
Well, they're pretty easy to run over. The first one is emotion. Second one is yearnings. The third one is listening to our inner voice. The fourth one is playfulness. The fifth one is understanding you have natural gifts and talents and purpose. Is so important to grasp that, because as you begin to awaken, they show up and people just become alive. Like this girl I was telling you about a minute ago that got married for I think the third time. And she's like, look, I'm getting married. I was never going to get married again. In her story, she wrote it for me. She was saying, I feel so alive. It's like life is so beautiful for me because she let go of all of the things that had harmed her on the inside and became this beautiful person, just really wonderful on the inside, natural gifts and talents. The last one, number 7, that I work with is relationships. And now the reason relationships is in this row 7 is because you can't work on the relationship until you have a bunch of other stuff in your brain working better. And so, if someone shows up with a relationship issue, I'm like, okay, so I'll see you apart for a long time, right? Because healthy people, I love this thought. Who wouldn't want to be married to the most wonderful person in the world? Who would want to be in a relationship with just the most wonderful person? Come on now. Don't we want to be around wonderful people? So I'll help you become that wonderful person so they want to be around you.
Yeah. And it's so true. And that's why so many relationships do fail, because on the inside, each individual has issues and wants to be seen, heard, whatever it might be. They haven't figured that out yet. And then that transcends into their relationship. And it is a two-way street. I'm not saying it's only one person, but
well, it isn't. And also the other part about it too is that when you understand that, sometimes when they don't see you, hear you, and you don't feel important because you've learned how to not to make it a big deal, you can move past it after a while. You only make the big things a big deal. But in our culture, we make way too many things the big deal.
So maybe it's a rhetorical question. Just got a second. How do you stay positive? You seem like a very positive person. What's your secret? What's the secret for anybody else to just, keep a positive outlook?
Oh my gosh. There's no simple answer to that. But one of the things that comes to my mind is that as I transition in every single part of my day, I let go of what happened behind me. I walk into a new room. I'm in a new room. What's behind me in that old room is behind me. Like I'm always forgetting to remember who I am. I just try to forget the stuff that just happened or to move past it, to just not let it affect me. You go from room to room. That room's behind me. Go to your car. I'm getting in my car. I'm outside of the house. If you can practice moving away from or letting go of all the things that are currently happening, that's called DBT. And we work on that also, which is letting go of the moment, being present or mindful. If you can practice that a lot, it really allows your brain to be more present, because you know how we carry things forward, right? And so this process of practicing letting go, or mantra, is super important.
Well, we carry things, but we need to keep moving forward without those things. Yes.
Well, the difference is what I'm talking about is you hold on to the emotion. Like, I can't believe that just happened. We want to talk about it. Well,
stuff.
We're just about
out of time. It's just happened. All right. One more thought. I think we have time. Let's go.
One more thought is the fact that when we tell the story about what happened, we're not letting go of it.
And so we're wired to do that. How many times I'll call up my friend, I don't believe what's going on, and he'll be the same way. And it's bad. It's counterproductive, but we all love to be itch, if you will, about things. And it's just human nature.
Well, the research on people who are really, really wealthy don't gossip and don't tell stories. It's true.
I'm going to put a period at the end of that sentence and say, can't wait to hear what happens next time we get together. And,
oh my gosh.
I never knew that. But that is very interesting that they could be. Why? Because guess what? Whatever happened back there, they don't really care. They're already moving forward.
Absolutely.
Dan Clark, great having you on again. Your website and how everybody can help benefit from what you do.
Well, thank you. I got some new stuff on my website. I got a free class on emotions. It's transformlife.net. Would love to hear from you. Just check it out.
I'm going to try and take that class this weekend.
Thank you.
Need it. Thanks a lot, Dan. We'll talk soon.
You bet.
All right. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
My name is Dan Clark with Transform Life. I've been thinking, what is life really about? Well, I think it's about living life fully. More specifically, it's about living your best life, or simply put, being the best version of yourself that you can be. When you think about it, it's because of all those obstacles that keep us from doing what we really want to do with our lives. Your best self is buried on the inside of you. I want to share with you how I transformed my life and how I've helped thousands of others transform their lives by becoming the best version of themselves. Transformlife.net.
If you can hear me, right? Yes. I can't hear you while this is still running. Otherwise, I come right back and talk. So I have to go on to another one. But
when I was little,
thank you. You were always awesome.
For a long time.
And I've been telling people about you too.
Well, thank you. We have an hour conversation coming. We have 2 hours coming up. You know that, right?
I was very sensitive to lights and sounds.
I can't hear you.
Okay. All right.
I'm trying to figure out. One day I'll have that figured out, how to do that.
Okay.
All right. I'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Sam.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.